of gender, identity, and human condition within the context of Canadian society. She was born in Manitoba. She grew up in a rural setting that deeply influenced her writing. She attended the University of Manitoba and later worked as a journalist before focusing on her writing career. Her notable works, one of the notable works is Stone Angel, written in 1962. This novel is a part of Manawaka series. We'll delve deep into this part, which is a semi autobiographical description of aging, of self reflection. It focuses on Harper Sibley, an elderly woman who grapples with her past and present as she moves ahead with her life. Another notable work of Margaret is A Jest of God, written in 1966. Here also she talks about a young woman struggling with identity and social expectations, how people get completely stuck within the pressures of the society and forgetting their individuality. Then she wrote one more book, The Diviners, in 1974, the final novel. This was also in the same Manawaka series, and it followed the life of Morag Gun, a writer who represents on her life and career. There is another notable work by Margaret Lawrence, that is This Side Jordan, that was written in 1960. These all talked about the post colonial themes. Now, Manawaka series is one of the most important theme or style that Lawrence prefers to maintain in all her novels, in most of her novels. This is a fictional town, Manawaka. It's a fictional town, and she draws her own experiences in rural Manitoba. The series explores complex social and psychological issues through richly developed characters. Her works frequently address issues related to women's role, mostly like personal freedom, societal constraint, and she's also noted for her evocative settings, her character, and how she establishes them into evocative settings. Lawrence's writing style is characterized by the lyrical prose and deep psychological insight. She often employs a first person narrative to provide intimate access to her characters' thoughts and emotions. Lawrence is considered one of Canada's most significant literary figures. Her works have been celebrated for their depth and their contribution to the understanding of Canadian identity and women's experience. She received numerous awards and honors throughout her career, including the Governor General's Award for Fiction. She continues her works to appreciate more within the human nature and its contribution to the Canadian literature. Now, Stone Angel, this novel is a classic of Canadian literature, published in 1962, tells the story of an elderly woman living in a nursing home in a fictional town of Manawaka, Manitoba, and her name is Hagar Shipley. She's an elderly woman, and how she reflects her life as she faces her mortality. This novel explores themes of aging, pride, family dynamics, passage of time, And to some extent, it also touches upon the Great Depression, particularly in the context of her own experiences. Hagar Shipley's, the main character, experiences and the broader socio-economic conditions affecting her community. The novel is set in the early mid 20th century, and that was a period when the Great Depression had come up, 1929 to 1939. And the impact of the Great Depression that is reflected in the economic hardships faced by the characters and the societal changes occurring during that time. Haggard's memories and reflections often provide insights into these struggles and the adjustments people had to make during that difficult period. We all know Great Depression was a difficult time then. Through Haggard's recollections and experiences, Margaret Lawrence explores how such historical events shape or impact personal lives and societal structures. We start with the plot summary. The plot summary of the novel: The Stone Angel, with the most important character, Hagar Shipley, living in a nursing home in a fictional town set in Manawaka, Manitoba, and she faces the decline of her health gradually as she ages. She reflects on her life with a mix of pride and regret. The novel explores Hagar's early years, first, the early life, focusing on her upbringing in a rural Manitoba family. Her father, Jason Curie, who is a stern, successful businessman. Her mother, who dies when Hagar is young and is somewhat neglected. Hagar's experiences in her youth, including her relationship with her family and the societal expectations placed upon her, shaped her character and views on life. As she grew older, the marriage and the family life came into picture. Hagar marries Bram Shipley, a man of lower social standing and questionable character. The marriage is troubled from the start, and Hagar's pride and stubbornness create further strife. The couple moves to a small farm where Hagar struggles with the demands of rural life and her growing dissatisfaction with her marriage. Their son, John, is born during this period, and Hagar's relationship with him is also strained. Definitely, if a mother is not happy, the child bearing would be unpleasant, and definitely it will impact the overall growth of the child. This is one of the biggest lessons that Margaret, somehow or the other, tries to show through her characters. Midlife struggles as she grows, or as she grows old, as she ages, she comes through midlife struggles also. She becomes increasingly isolated from her family. Dissatisfaction is the key for that. She feels a deep sense of loss. There is disillusionment with the choices she has made. Her relationship with her son, John, deteriorates further, and we see John moving away from her as she's left to contend with the consequences of her own decisions and attitudes. Of course, then later years, Hagar reflects on her own life with a mix of defiance and sorrow. Her struggles with her own sense of identity and autonomy are central themes. Her interactions with her family members, including her daughter in law and her grandchildren, highlight the growing gap between her ideals and her reality. Definitely, this is such a mirror reflection of every generation. When you are dissatisfied with your entire life, and you just follow that cyclic pattern of bearing a child, being a mother, then being the mother in law, and then looking up to the grandchildren. The cyclic pattern keeps on going, but you never come out of your attitude, and this creates immense loss of harmony within the family and ultimately the society. The novel concludes with Hagar's death. Through her reflections, the reader gains insight into her internal conflicts, her regrets, and her enduring sense of pride. The stone angel of the novel's title symbolizes both her strength and her inability to connect with others. This is what is the reality of many people in every other age, in every other generation. Most of the themes that Margaret Lawrence would want to represent in this novel is pride and stubbornness. Hagar's pride and independence are central to her character, but also lead her to isolation and suffering. This is such a sure fact. When you want to be independent, you would definitely be so assertive in your way of speech, in your way of processing your behavior, in your way of presenting yourself. People would not like to be around you. Either they hate you, they are jealous of you, or they highly disregard of you. So you will stay isolated. However, only the highly conscious people, highly aware people would understand this is not suffering. This is where it is. If you are surrounded by people who judge you, definitely it's better to be isolated. This is only the consciousness of higher conscious mind would be able to understand that. But unfortunately, not many of us are that conscious. They believe that to stay in a society, it is so important to be just like them. And in that process, they lose their own identity and their individuality. However, moving forward, regret and reflection is also one of the core theme that Margaret wants to showcase in the novel. The novel delves deeply into Hagar's regrets about her life choices and her reflections on what might have been. This is what regret teaches you. It teaches you what could have been, what might have been after you already choosing for something. Family and social expectations become another theme in the novel. Hagar's relationship with her family and her struggle against societal expectations are the key drives of the novel. The novel structure, with its focus on Hagar's memories and reflections, provide a poignant exploration of human condition, a very relatable consideration of pride, lack of personal identity, and other complexities. That is what the novel structure is all about. We start with chapter 1. We talk about the plot. We talk about the characters, important characters involved. We talk about more details about the plot. We do some critical analysis. We try to dig into the thematic exploration. Then we read some important lines from chapter 1 and then we continue till chapter 10. So let's start with chapter 1. Chapter 1 of Stone Angel. We are introduced to Hagar Shipley in her old age. She is now living in a nursing home, reflecting on her past. The chapter begins with Hagar's strong sense of pride and self reliance, which contrasts sharply with her current diminished state. She reflects on her life. The narrative moves between her present situation and flashbacks to her earlier years, providing insights into her character and the life she once lived. Important character here is definitely Harger Shipley, the central character of the entire novel. She's depicted as a formidable and a proud elderly woman. Her reflections and interactions reveal her complex personality and that set the stage for understanding her life's journey. The nursing home staff, as the characters involved, they're not deeply associated or explored in this chapter, but their presence and interactions with Hagar provide context of her current circumstances. The chapter opens with Hagar's critical perspective of nursing home environment, highlighting her discomfort and frustration with the loss of independence. As she's aging, this is what it is, the sheer truth of life. Loss of independence you have to be dependent on as you age. Her internal monologue reveals her sense of alienation and the tension between her present vulnerability and her past pride. The, the most intense truth of all times is when you try to look back to the kind of pride you ever had and to the current vulnerable situation where you are so weak that you are absolutely dependent on people and you accept all sorts of behaviors from them. Flashbacks to her youth and early adulthood provide background on her character and the events that have shaped her current situation. Chapter 1 here establishes uh, Hagar Shipley to have been both empowered and isolation in her nature right now. There is an internal struggle between self reliance and her understanding of vulnerability. And the nursing home setting talks about the emotional confinement, the physical confinement of Hagar. There is a stark difference to her previously active and self sufficient life. We see the use of back to back flashbacks interwoven with present day reflections, which provides a layered understanding of Haggard's character, allowing readers to see how her past experiences have influenced her current state. Exploring the theme, we see there is pride, there is regret, there is isolation, there is identity. Let's start with the lines or the passages from chapter 1. I am tired of all the talk. I am tired of all the talk and the letters and the questions. I am tired of myself. This excerpt sets the tone for Hagar Shipley's character, highlighting her weariness with her current life and the people around her. It reflects her frustration with the ongoing discussions and her introspective nature. Hagar's exhaustion indicates her internal struggle and foreshadows the theme of isolation and self reflection that will be central throughout the novel. The repetition of the word tired underscores her deep sense of fatigue and disillusionment with life. The old house, which had been a home for all these years, was now empty and lonely, much like myself. Here, the physical setting of the house symbolizes Hagar's emotional state. The emptiness of the house parallels Hagar's feelings of loneliness and loss. This metaphor illustrates the theme of isolation and sense of disconnect between Hagar and her surroundings. The description of the house as empty and lonely reflects her own sense of emptiness and loneliness, her own detachment from her past and present life. I cannot help but think of the past, of my own failures and the choices I made. They come to me in vivid dreams, haunting me like shadows. This line reveals Hagar's preoccupation with the past and her feelings of regret. The use of haunting suggests that her past decisions are not just memories but persistent, troubling presence in her life. The vivid dreams symbolize her struggle to reconcile with her past and the impact of her choices on her current state. This reflects the broader theme of regret and the difficulty of escaping one's own history. My father's voice still echoes in my mind, a constant reminder of the expectations and the burdens I carried. Hagar's reflection on her father's voice illustrate the lasting impact of parental influence on her identity and self-perception. The echoes, the word echoes of her father's voice signify the ongoing effect of past expectations and burdens on her present life. This highlights the theme of familial expectations and how they shape Hagar's self image and choices. It also emphasizes the theme of lasting influence of one's upbringing. I used to think I could conquer the world, but now I see the limits of my ambitions, the narrowness of my own vision, clearly suggesting she is getting old. This passage serves captures a moment of realization for Hagar, where her past ambitions and contrasted with her current limitations. The shift from the conquer the world, feeling powerful, to identifying the narrowness of a vision reflects her disillusionment and the realization of her own constraints. This moment is significant as it encapsulates the theme of ambition versus reality and the inevitable confrontation with one's limitations as one nears the end of life. Chapter 1 here introduces the key themes. We see there is regret, there is isolation, there is the impact of past decision. Hagar Shipley's reflection sets the stage for more exploration of her complex character, her relationships, her internal struggles. The lines highlights her weariness, her sense of emptiness, and the haunting nature of her regrets. Now, through these reflections, Margaret Lawrence establishes a deep emotional connection with Hagar and sets up the narrative of coming to terms with one's past and the inevitable consequences of one's choices. Now, tell me, what do you think Margaret Lawrence, as the author, wants to convey here? What does she wants to convey? What does she wants to convey here? What does Margaret Lawrence wants to convey in chapter 1? Anybody who would want to express?
She wants to speak about how a woman is important, her feelings are
Hmm.
important,
Hmm.
and it is important that she be happy. The child in the womb also stays happy. The upbringing is in a positive manner.
Mm-hmm.
It is one thing I could understand.
Okay.
And in her old age, as told, she was not taken care of. She was drifted from the family also.
Hmm.
She was drifted from her son away, her son and daughter-in-law also,
Mm-hmm.
even her immediate extension family also. So that is also one more thing I could understand.
Okay. Okay. Good. Good. Thank you, Rishma. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anybody? You may please use the chat section if you are, having difficulty in using the mic. You can please use the chat section. So, as she is aging, she is trying to reflect back to her past life where she regrets of not achieving certain goals and purposes that she might have in her mind that period of time. The regret of not achieving that stayed in her mind in such a fashion that still towards the end of the life where she uh, should be happily reflecting over her past life. Yes. So Shri, we are talking about Stone Angel today, the novel written by a Canadian writer. Okay, Margaret Lawrence, Canadian writer Margaret Lawrence. Yeah. So that's what happens, and this is such a lesson for mostly because she writes for women. She writes about women, and this is such a lesson for all we women that we need to have purposes in our life, and we need to fulfill those purposes. We need to achieve those goals in our life. That is what the authors wants to intend, because as we move ahead in our life and as we grow old, all we will have is the memories of what we had achieved, what we had failed, how we have learned from our mistakes. And if we did not have a fulfilled life or good memories with us, the end of the life, by the time we are closing our eyes and we are waving a goodbye to this earth, we will have nothing but regrets. And it is such a painful experience to keep yourself into that position and see or feel that how a life without uh, achieving such purpose can just vanish like that. This is the most disturbing part, and that's what the author here wants to convey in a very subtle manner, that uh, although she introduces Hagar Shipley as a very complex character, she also mentions here that she was once upon a time very bright. Of course, we can relate that with ourselves. We at times we are also very proud about our attitude, the way we carry ourselves. We might have taken some wrong decisions and how that has impacted. So she's giving actually a very clear picture of those many persons in the world, those many women in the world, and how the personal pride has been uh, strangulated by the societal expectations, which has caused the loss of individual identity. So that is what the author's intention is, where she's trying to present Hagar's current state alongside the flashback of her past. She's trying to showcase how she's feeling right now and how she used to feel in the past. So there is a deeper understanding of Hagar's life. Overall, it's a life journey of everyone. The internal conflicts we sometimes come across, we go through, and the consequences of all those choices or the decisions that we have made. Great. We move to chapter 2 now. What is the plot? Let's understand. In chapter 2, the narrative shifts back to Hagar Shipley's early life. The chapter primarily focuses on Hagar's childhood and her relationship with her family. It introduces her father, Jason Curie, who is a wealthy and a domineering businessman who provides insights into Hagar's upbringing and family dynamics. The chapter explores Hagar's experiences in her home environment, highlighting the influence of her father and the impact of his values and expectations on her character. Who do we find as characters in this chapter? In this chapter, we see there is a younger version of Hagar who is growing up in a wealthy but emotionally distant family environment. That is what happens when parents are only focusing on the growth of the family financial wise. They happen to make their children go away from them or make distance from them emotional wise. So it is so important that the vice versa thing, that you need to grow up or you need to grow ahead or gather more emotions, more wisdom to your family, so that you stay so connected that although there is a lack of financial needs or things, that would still not cause much pain like the way emotionally distant family environment creates. Okay, then we meet Jason Curie, who is Hagar's father, a wealthy and controlling figure whose values and expectations significantly shape Hagar's early life and attitude. We meet Mrs. Curie, who is Hagar's mother, largely absent from her life due to illness and early death. Her relationship with Hagar is minimal but influential. We also meet Hagar's sibling in the chapter, while not a primary focus, but yes, Hagar's siblings are mentioned, contributing to the portrayal of her family dynamics. The chapter delves into Hagar's childhood, focusing on the father's authoritarian nature and the impact of his expectations on her. There is a sense of distance we see, there is a lack of emotional connection we see, there is a cold and demanding environment that she has been raised into. The early experiences of feelings constrained by her father value and societal expectations sets the stage for her later struggles with both pride and independence. The formative years of Hagar's helps us to understand her later attitudes and behaviors. Jason Curie, the dominating nature, the emotionally distant person in the family, these are the central themes to understand in Hagar's development of emotional and mental context. Opulence is what we see. The setting is opulent but emotionally barren, and this chapter uses detailed flashbacks to build Hagar's backstory, offering readers a deeper understanding of her character and the influences that shaped her. So, let's go into some of the important lines from chapter 2. My brother Dan, who was so much younger than I, had always looked up to me with such admiration, though I never quite understood why. Now, this line reveals Hagar's complex feelings about her brother Dan. The use of the word admiration highlights Dan's reverence for Hagar, contrasting with her own lack of understanding or reciprocation. She did not understand her connection, and why he used to admire her so much. It underscores a recurring theme in the novel that Hagar's difficulty in connecting emotionally with those around her, while Dan is her brother, her sibling, and the younger one. He should receive all kinds of affection from somebody he is looking up to. However, her sense of detachment just could not help her build a very strong relationship with her siblings. The line also reflects the theme of sibling dynamics here and how Hager's sense of superiority or detachment affected her relationships. Next line. The town was changing, becoming more modern, and I felt alienated from the progress that was leaving me behind. There is a sudden social change in her town that period of time, and her feeling of being left behind symbolizes her broader struggle with modernization and the passage of time. This line illustrates Hagar's discomfort with change and her sense of displacement as she struggles to adapt to a world that is evolving beyond her control. It reflects the theme of generational conflict and the difficulty of reconciling lining with the societal progress. I remember the days when my father's expectations seemed like a heavy clock that I could never shed, no matter how hard I try. The metaphor used here, heavy clock, to describe the oppressive nature of the Hagar's father's expectations. Imagery evokes a sense of burden and constraint, highlighting how these expectations have influenced Hagar's sense of self and her choices. The familial pressure, long lasting impact on Hagar's identity, emotional well being. Definitely, a father has to be not only the head of the family, but also, if he's the head, he's carrying the brain, he's carrying the mind of the entire family. He needs to connect with everyone. That is what mind does to our body. However, if there is the head of the family with no mind or brain and he lacks connectivity with the family, how can a family have an emotional bonding? This definitely impacted the younger version of Hagar. Moving ahead. Looking back, I see now that my marriage was a way of escaping from the constraint of my family, though it led me to a different set of entrapments. She is moving ahead in the passage of time where she's reflecting on her marriage as an escape from the familiar constraints, revealing her dissatisfaction with her life choices. The notion of marriage is here considered as an escape. Look at the look at the predicament of a woman's life where she is so disconnected from her family that she believes marriage is an only escape, and she considers marriage an escape from her own family, familial constraint. This clearly tells the theme of seeking freedom from the past burdens. The idea here is that most of the women, particularly at one period of time, they marry because uh, they just have to come out of the already existing burden from the family. The parents do the same thing. They have to get the daughters married off because gradually they just have to finish off their duties and other societal reasons for which they just cannot keep their daughters at their homes, and lack of emotional attachment can be again one of the reasons where gradually women seek to believe that if we marry we receive a freedom and that will give us a freedom from our past burdens. However, the fact is they are only encountering new forms of entrapment. This is what happened with Hagar. Her notion of marriage, where she believed she can come out of her past burdens, only put her into new forms of entrapment. This insight reflects Hagar's struggle with finding true autonomy and the realization that personal decisions can lead to unforeseen consequences. How beautifully Hagar can relate to so many uh, women out there where they believe that the only decision they can come to take to escape from the already existing burden is to really escape from that place. So, yes, in those early years, I believe I could change the world, but with each day passing day, I felt my dreams becoming more distant and unattainable. This line highlights Hagar's disillusionment. This is what many of us believe. We believe that we can change the world of our own. We believe that as time changes, as day passes, we believe that we can bring something as a change to our own world, to our own life, but destiny has something else for us. The contrast between her youthful idealism and her current sense of unattainable dreams reflects the theme of ambition versus reality. It underscores Hagar's growing awareness of her limitations and the gap between her aspirations and her lived experience. She's living her experiences now, and that she always aspired to is a big gap between the two. This realization contributes to the broader themes of regret and the struggle to reconcile with one's past. Chapter 2 further develops Hagar Shipley's character. She's exploring her relationships, her feelings of alienation, her reflections of past decisions that reveals her emotional detachment from her family, her struggle with societal change, her disillusionment with her own ambitions. Margaret Lawrence is using all these reflections to delve into themes of familial expectations, societal progress, and the quest for personal freedom. The chapter deepens the reader's understanding of Hagar's internal conflict and sets up the narrative for exploring the consequences of her choices and the impact of her personal history on her current state. Let's understand what does the author has to say here. What do you think? What does the author intends to tell here? What are the author's intentions?
That she's bound by family.
Yes, somehow her discontentment, because we saw an example that she's not being able to reciprocate with the admiration factor by Dan, her younger brother. She also has no level of emotional bonding with both her parents. If she's so discontent from herself or from within, her internal self is so full of turmoil, and that this is giving a burden, and that is how she is taking a decision to marry, and she is believing that this will be the end of it. She only finds that her marriage is just but another trap waiting for her. That is what many times we fail to understand, having a self having a disconnect with the self. That is where we find ourselves into problem. Okay, moving to chapter 3. Chapter 3 of the Stone Angel focuses on Hagar Shipley's adulthood and her marriage to Bram Shipley. It provides insight into Hagar's choices and the evolution of her character as she transitions from her life under her father's authority to her role as a wife and mother. The chapter explores the dynamics of Hagar's marriage and her adjustments to a new lifestyle that contrasts sharply with her earlier privileged life. Let's see how it is delving deep now. We find a young adult here, Hagar Shipley, the version of young adult. We see her as a young woman. Hagar is navigating the challenges of marriage and adjusting to a new life away from her father's home. The decision was solely her, and now she is married to Bram Shipley, another character who is Hagar's husband, whose lower social standing and unconventional ways create tension in the relationship. Bram is portrayed as rough, unrefined, and not suited to Hagar's expectations. Hagar's father, Jason Curie, is also not physically present as a character, but his influence remains strong as Hagar struggled with the expectations and values she observed from him. Hagar's mother, who is mentioned in passing, her absence is felt, and her death impacts Hagar's life and decisions. All these happen in chapter 3. The chapter details Hagar's marriage to Bram Sibley, emphasizing the contrast between her previous life of privilege, because she was leading an opulent life, a life full of uh, pleasure and comfort and other things, everything except emotional connect, and her new, more difficult circumstances. Hagar's initial enthusiasm for marriage quickly turns into disillusionment as she faces the realities of living with Bram, who is less refined and more financially unstable than she anticipated. The narrative explores Hagar's struggle with adjusting to the demands of rural life, including managing a farm, dealing with the social economic challenges that come with it. The chapter highlights the clash between Hagar's expectations and reality of her marriage. Bram's character contrasts sharply with Hagar's refined background, illustrating the difficulties Hagar faces in reconciling her past with her present. The setting here in this chapter is a rural setting, a farm, which represents a significant shift from Hagar's previous life of luxury. Imagine coming from the state of opulence to a rural setting, how challenging it can be. However, they say that if you love the company around you, you would love any place you are in. But the unfortunate fact is, she loved neither. The use of flashbacks and the Hagar's internal monologue we find in the chapter, they provide a deeper understanding of her feelings and motivations, revealing her internal conflicts and sense of disappointment. Chapters. Chapter 3. I remember the first time I set eyes on the stone angel. It stood there in the garden, silent and imposing, a testament to the rigidity of my father's value. This passage introduces the stone angel, a central symbol in the novel. The angel's silent and imposing presence reflects the rigidity of Hagar's father values and the impact they have had on Hagar's life. The stone angel here represents not only Hagar's father's strict expectations but also Hagar's own struggle with conforming to these values. It underscores the theme of familial influence and the burden of inherited expectations. I often wonder if I had a mistake in marrying Bram. His silent demeanor and the distance between us felt like an insurmountable chasm. This line reflects Hagar's dissatisfaction with her marriage. To branch a place she is regretting. She is thinking she has committed a mistake, a grave one. The insurmountable chasm, as a metaphor, highlights the emotional distance and the lack of communication between them. Hagar's doubts about her marriage reveal her inner turmoil and dissatisfaction with her life choices. This passage contributes to the theme of troubled relationships and the search for meaningful connections. The world outside was changing rapidly, but within the walls of our home, time seemed to stand still, bound by the traditions and expectations of a bygone era. This is what happens in many of the family, which this line contrasts the changing world outside with the static, traditional environment of Hagar's home. It underscores Hagar's sense of stagnation and disconnection from the modern world. The contrast between external progresses and internal constraints highlights the theme of generational conflict and Hagar's struggle to reconcile with societal advancement while feeling trapped by past values. I used to think that strength meant never showing weakness, but now I see this belief has left me isolated and unable to connect with those around me. Her reflection on understanding of strength reveals a critical shift in her perspective. The belief that strength equates to never showing weaknesses has led to her emotional isolation. This line highlights the theme of personal growth. She is aging, so she is getting matured and more sensible to understand that emotional openness is crucial for meaningful connections. The one which she could just never show even to her younger brother or any of her parents, she is now realizing the importance of it. She also reflects upon her awareness and the impact of her rigid beliefs that has made her relationships really cry. In the quiet moments when I am alone with my thoughts, I confront the regrets and failures that I have tried so hard to ignore throughout my life. This line captures Hacker's introspective moments, internal monologues, and her confrontation with past regrets and failures. The quiet moments symbolize Hagar's solitude and the space where her inner conflicts emerge. This passage emphasizes the theme of self reflection and the difficulty of facing one's own shortcomings. End of chapter 3. We quickly take a break here and we begin with chapter 4, chapter 5, and then we continue till chapter 10. So you can go take a break. We can take a short break today, 5 minutes max, and then we come back.
Okay.
Welcome back. Let's begin. So, before taking the break, we focused on the character Hagar Shipley, where she continues to reflect upon her marriage. Yes, Reshma, yes, please.
I mean, ma'am, I mean, nothing else.
Okay, okay, fine. Thank you. Okay. So that was what we reflected. We explored Hagar Shipley's character to be where she is asking herself, and this has come to gradual realization. And this is how what happens as we become more maturer or more sensible as we age. And there she frequently has still more inner conflicts about asking herself if she has committed a mistake of marrying Bram Shipley. Moving to chapter 4 of The Stone Angel continues to explore Hagar Shipley's life as she grapples with the realities of her marriage. She comes across situations where she comes to face uh, more realities of her marriage and family life. She her experiences uh, is clearly seen with her son John Shipley and her struggles with her evolving role as a mother and wife. The narrative reveals the growing tensions in her family life and Hagar's internal conflict as she tries to cope up with her changing circumstances. Hagar Shipley is seen as a character here in this chapter who is now deeply entrenched in the difficulties of rural life and her role as a mother. Her struggles with her identity and pride are evident as she interacts with her family. Bram Shipley, Hagar's husband, whose continuing lack of refinement and stability exacerbates the challenges Hagar faces. This character remains a continued source of tension in the marriage. We meet John Shipley, Hagar's son, who becomes a central focus in this chapter. His relationship with Hagar is strained, and the chapter explores their interactions and the impact of Hagar's attitude on their relationship. The Curie family, although not directly present, but Hagar's upbringing and her father's values continue to influence her actions and decisions. So let's continue with the passages. The more I tried to instill my values, the more he seemed to drift away from me, as though my efforts to mold him into what I believed he should be only pushed him further. This line highlights the strained relationship between Hagar and her son. She's trying to instill her values into her son, but the more she is doing, she's trying to instill her values into her son, the more he seems to drift away from her. Hagar's attempts only results in an increasing and more emotional distance between them. The tension between Hagar's desire to control and her son's resistance underscores the theme of generational conflict and the difficulties of parental influence. There is a lot of struggle to understand, and her son's individuality further leads to more isolation. I had always prided myself on my independence, but as the years went by, I began to realize that my self sufficiency had come at a cost of genuine human connection. She is reflecting on her independent reveals. She is reflecting on the consequences of her fiercely self reliant nature, the way she was, the way she carried her pride, on how independent she used to be. She recognizes that this trait has led to a lack of meaningful relationships. This excerpt underscores the theme of isolation, particularly the self imposed isolation due to an unwillingness to show vulnerability. It also reflects the broader theme of tension between self sufficiency and the need of emotional intimacy. I could see the disappointment in my father's eyes whenever I spoke of my aspirations, as though my dreams were merely fanciful notions unworthy of pursuit. She is thinking of how she used to express her ideas or aspirations to her father, and how his father used to disapprove her ambitions. The disappointment in her father's eyes symbolize the weight of her expectations and the dismissal of her aspirations. So, this is clearly the cause, and she keeps on thinking about the same again and again in the chapter. I thought that by leaving Bram, I could reclaim a part of myself that had been lost, but all I found was a different kind of emptiness. Now, she is taking another decision to leave Bram, her husband, reflecting her desire for autonomy and self rediscovery. However, the realization that this choice led to a different kind of emptiness reveals the complexity of her emotions and the unintended consequences of her actions. This excerpt underscores the theme of disillusionment as Hagar confronts the reality that escaping one form of entrapment does not necessarily lead to fulfillment. Look at the way she had been escaping, and that is what most of us do. Very beautifully, the author is trying to reflect the true essence of human existence, that how they all they have to do is shift from one burden to another, thinking of achieving fulfillment. But the fact is that they are really not contented. The theme of self identity, the loss of self identity, the want to get the self identity keeps on coming back to back, making the characters believe that they would find true contentment sooner or later. The more I reflected on my life, the more I saw how pride had been both my shield and my downfall, protecting me from pain, but also keeping me away from happiness. Just look at the mechanism what pride can sometimes have on someone's life. This line captures Hacker's growing awareness as she is reflecting again and again to her own life, where there is the role of pride, which is clearly mentioned and which has already played a lot in her shaping her life. Pride, which served to be protective, but it also contributing to her emotional inability to form deep connections. This is what the author wants to showcase here, the dual nature of pride, which acts both as a shield and a downfall, reflecting the theme of personal flaws and the consequences of adhering too rigidly to one's belief. That's the reason why the word flexibility comes to help or escape, not literally but metaphorically. It also highlights the broader theme of self reflection and the realization of how one's own traits can lead to both strength and suffering. Chapter 4, where Hagar Shipley's introspection focuses on her relationships, her values, her personal lives, her personal flaws, the complexities of her relationship with her son, with her father, as well as her ongoing struggle with her own identity and the consequences of her decisions. This is what happens in reality where we don't understand the base of problems. We don't understand the base of problems and we keep on simply escaping the problems. We believe by escaping the problems, we are actually escaping it once and for all. But the fact is, the same problems would take ugly shapes in some ugly places, in some ugly colors and forms, in a way that one might just never ever recover from. Margaret Lawrence here continues to explore the themes of generational conflict that we see between the mother and the son, isolation, pride, and challenges of reconciling with one's past, the internal conflicts. However, there is a gradual realization of how her traits and choices she had made, have shaped her life. Margaret Lawrence, the author of the book The Stone Angel, further explores Hagar Shipley's struggles with her role as a mother and wife here in this chapter, and how she is every day struggling to develop some kind of peace or harmony. However, because of the conflicts, the internal and the external conflicts, Hagar's life is rather having a broader implications of sense of disillusionment and lack of self discovery. Moving to chapter 5, where uh, we focus on the later years of Hagar Shipley's life, particularly her experiences as a middle aged woman. This chapter delves into the impact of Hagar's past choices on her present life, including her relationship with her husband, Bran Shipley, and their strained family dynamics. Now she's already a middle aged woman. She has had enough experiences, although all those experiences are still so fresh in her memory that she keeps on getting back to them, maybe for a purpose of trying to reconnect, or maybe for a purpose of getting away from them once and for all. But the consequences of her choices or the decisions that she's making are deep and thorough, so severe and strained that she lacks to take any clear decisions and thereby eliminate any kind of tension between her internal and her external conflicts. In her middle age now, we see Hagar Shipley, who is grappling with the consequences again with her past choices. She's frustrated, she's disillusioned, she continues to grow in the same fashion as she reflects on her life and its outcomes. Hagar's husband, whose ongoing lack of success and refinement exacerbates their marital difficulties, Bram's character remains a source of tension. Hagar's son now is an adult and has distanced himself from his mother because of obvious reasons, because generational gap arises where parents force their own thoughts, their lack of purposes onto their own children, and the children, because of a different generation, they fail to understand. Either way, they fail to understand both the generation, and thus creates a gap, and this is where the relationships remain strained. The chapter explores Hagar's growing discontent with her life and her continued struggle to find meaning and satisfaction. Haggard reflects on the decision she has made and the ways in her which her past choices have led to her current dissatisfaction. There is an increased sense of alienation from her family and her struggle to come in terms with limitations of her life. Her interactions with John, her son, and Bram further emphasize her feelings of disappointment and isolation. There is a replications of her past. There is a introspection which talks more about the complexities. The setting is still the rural life where it continues to symbolize her sense of entrapment and dissatisfaction. Let's delve into the chapter 5. It was in that old house with its peeling paint and creaking floors that I began to realize the extent of my loneliness, even though I had chosen this path myself. This line underscores the theme of loneliness and emptiness that permeates Hagar's life. The imagery of the old house with peeling paint and creaking floors symbolizes Hagar's internal decay and the emptiness she feels despite her earlier decisions. The passage highlights the paradox of self imposed isolation. Hagar's choices made in the name of independence, that is what many of us do, have led to profound loneliness. This reflects the broader theme of the consequences of one's choices and the inevitable regrets that follow. John was my pride, my flesh and blood, the one thing I believed I had done right in my life. But even that belief was shattered in the end. Look at the words used by our mother and the kind of resentment that she is carrying for herself or for the decisions that she has taken. Her relationship with her son is central to her sense of identity and self worth. This line reveals the depth of her attachment to her son John, seeing him as her greatest achievement. However, the reference to his belief being shattered foreshadows the tragedy that unfolds. The passage explores the theme of painful reality of unmet expectations. It also reflects Hager's struggle to reconcile her love for John with the eventual loss and disillusionment she experiences. I had always believed that by showing strength I could avoid pain, but I never realized that strength could also prevent me from feeling the joy that comes from being vulnerable. This is a very strong sentence, an important sentence, where Hagar talks about her lifelong belief that strength is synonymous with avoiding pain. The passage highlights the theme of vulnerability, suggesting that Hagar's insistence on being strong has deprived her for the emotional intimacy and joy that comes from allowing oneself to be vulnerable. This realization contributes to the ongoing theme of self awareness and the limitations of Hagar's rigid approach to life. The town gossips whispered about my marriage, their voices like the rustling of dry leaves carrying rumors that stung like nettles. The simile of the word gossip's voices being like the rustling of dry leaves and the stung like nettles convey the pain and the discomfort Hagar feels due to the scrutiny of others. This line illustrates the theme of societal judgment and the impact of gossip on Hagar's reputation and self perception. It also reflects her sensitivity to how she is perceived by others, despite her outward display of indifference, adding to the complexity of her character. There were moments when I wanted to reach out to say what I truly felt, but something always held me back, as though my own voice had been silenced by years of stubbornness and pride. Look at the internal conflict that Haggard keeps on focusing on throughout the novel between her desire for connection and the barriers she has created through her pride and stubbornness. The imagery of her voice being silenced reflects the theme of emotional repression and the difficulties Hagar faces in, in expressing her true feelings. This passage highlights the tragic consequences of her inability to communicate openly, reinforcing the themes of isolation and the emotional toll of pride. The authors wants to explore the impact of Hagar Shipley's past decision and through the detailed characterization and the thematic exploration of personal pride, Lawrence illustrates the complexities of Hagar's life. Moving to chapter 6 of The Stone Angel continues to explore Hagar Shipley's later years, focusing on her experience as an elderly woman reflecting on her life. The chapter examines Hagar's deteriorating health and her strained interactions with her family, particularly her son, John Shipley. It highlights the contrasts between her past and present, exploring her sense of alienation and the consequences of her life choices. Now elderly, Hagar's physical decline and mental state are central to this chapter. Her interactions with her family and her reflections on her past provide insight into her current situation. Hagar's son, who continues to have a strained relationship with his mother, his interactions with Hagar reveal ongoing tensions. There is a staff we see, the nursing home staff, where Hagar resides, play a minor but significant role in this chapter. The chapter explores Hagar's physical and emotional decline as she ages. This is what happens as we grow, and this is the harsh reality which we fail to accept. Her struggles with her health and the loss of independence are depicted in detail in this chapter, reflecting her ongoing sense of frustration and helplessness. Hagar's interactions with her son John are marked by tension and unresolved conflicts. The chapter reveals the continued strain in the relationship and the impact of Hagar's decisions on their current dynamics. She keeps on thinking about the past actions and how that has made her what she is today. The narrative also touches on Hagar's interaction with the nursing home staff, which illustrates her feelings of isolation and her struggle to adapt to her new environment. Chapter 6 deepens the portrayal of Hagar as an elderly woman grappling with the consequences of her life choices. The theme of aging is a thematic exploration that the author wants to explore here. The physical decline is central to this chapter. Hagar struggles with her health, reflect the broader themes of mortality and the consequences of a life lived according to personal pride. Let's move into chapter 6. I wanted to protect John from the harshness of the world, but in doing so, I only pushed him further away, as though my care became a burden he longed to escape. She's reflecting, she's missing her son, she's reflecting upon her relationship that she tried to maintain with her son. Her desire to protect him reflects her deep maternal instinct. Undoubtedly, every mother would want to, but her overprotectiveness inadvertently drives a wedge between them. The line underscores the theme of unintended consequences, where Hagar's attempts to care for John result in emotional distance. It also touches on the broader theme of the difficulties in balancing love and control, illustrating how Hagar's actions are often counterproductive despite her good intentions. I thought often about what might have been if I had chosen differently, if I had not been so stubborn in my ways. But when I would shake off such thoughts as though they were dangerous, she reflects, and the what ifs in her life reveals her deep seated regret and the ongoing struggle with the consequences of her choices. The idea that she shakes off these thoughts as dangerous suggests a fear of confronting the reality of her mistakes. This excerpt contributes to the theme of denial and the human tendency to avoid painful truths. It also highlights Hagar's internal conflict between her pride and the nagging doubts about the life she has led. The town has changed around me. Buildings went up, people moved in and out, but inside our home, it was as though time had stopped, as though we were trapped in a world that no longer existed. This line juxtaposes the external changes in the town with the stagnant, unchanging environment of Hagar's home, the imagery of being trapped in a world that no longer existed reflects Hagar's sense of being out of sync with the world around her. This excerpt underscores the theme of stagnation and the inability to adapt to change, which is a recurring issue in Hagar's life. It also reflects her isolation, both physically and emotionally, as she clings to a past that no longer has relevance in the present. In the moments of silence between us, I could feel the weight of all that was unsaid, all the words that had been swallowed out of fear or stubbornness. This line captures the unspoken tensions in Hagar's relationship, particularly with her son. The weight of her, the weight of all that was unsaid symbolizes the emotional burden of repressed feelings and unsolved conflicts. The passage emphasizes the theme of communication, the lack thereof, and how it contributes to Hagar's isolation and strained relationship. It also underscores the consequences of emotional repression as Hagar's fear and stubbornness prevent her from expressing her true feelings, leading to a deep sense of regret and loneliness. Overall, chapter 6 talks about the themes of maternal love with the continued forms of difficulties in communication of Hagar's around and the characters around her. This chapter deepens the reader's understanding of Hagar's internal world and the tragic consequences of her inability to adapt and communicate effectively. Margaret Lawrence here perhaps wants to communicate the importance of communication in every other fields of life, particularly in family for their own orientation, and how the lack thereof can bring dangerous consequences, leading to lifelong scars and bruises, not physically but mentally and emotionally. Moving to chapter 7, where the chapter delves into Hagar Shipley's life, focusing on her final days and her reflections on her past. We see Hagar's deteriorating health and her interactions with her family, particularly with her son John and her granddaughter, who represents a connection to the younger generation. The chapter highlights Hagar's ongoing struggles, keeps on coming back to her mind again and again, the decisions that she had taken and the complex feeling attached with them. Now, in the final stages of her life, Hagar is physically frail, mentally reflective. Interactions with family members and her reflections on her past are central. John, Hagar's son, who continues to have a strained relationship with her. His interactions with Hagar are marked with unresolved issues. The final days in nursing home where her health continues to decline. Her physical condition reflects the broader theme of aging and the passage of time. Hagar's interaction with John and her granddaughter provide insight into her relationships with her family. Strained relationship with John is contrasted with her more nuanced interactions with her granddaughter. We see Hagar is already facing the end of her life. Her interactions with her family and her reflections on her past symbolize Hagar's sense of confinement and isolation. The current situation and the earlier life, the contrast between the two extremes, that is what is the setting of this chapter. We find there is mortality and decline, there is regret and reflection, there is a generational difference, as we also have a new character here, Hagar's granddaughter, who is emphasizing the theme of generalization differences. Let's delve into the chapter. We moved to Manawaka, back to that place of ghosts and memories, where the past seemed more alive than the present, and the weight of history pressed down on me like a shroud. This passage illustrates Hagar's return to Manawaka, a place filled with memories and unresolved emotions. The imagery of ghosts and memories suggests that Hagar is haunted by her past, unable to escape the events that has shaped her life. The weight of history pressing upon on her symbolizes the burden of the past which continues to influence her present. This passage reflects the theme of memory and the inescapable influence of one's history, highlighting how Hagar's inability to let go of the past prevents her from fully engaging with the present. When I saw John again after all those years, I was struck by how much he had aged, how life had aged its mark on him, and yet he still have had that same quiet resolve I remember from his childhood. Hagar's observation of her son reveals the passage of time and the changes it has brought. The reference to how much he has aged highlights the inevitable effects of time both on Hagar and her son. Despite these changes, John's quiet resolve remains, indicating a consistent aspect of his character. This passage touches on the theme of time and the enduring qualities of individuals, as well as the bittersweet realization that life has moved on, leaving both physical and emotional marks on those involved. I had always believed that my life would amount to something, that I would leave a mark on this world. But as I sat in that small, dim room, I wondered if anybody would even remember me after I was gone. This is the feeling of every other person in this world. This line captures Hagar's existential reflection on her life's meaning and legacy. The small, dim room serves as a metaphor for her shrinking world and fading significance. Her doubt about whether she will be remembered reflects the theme of mortality and the fear of being forgotten. This passage also underscores Hagar's internal struggle with the realization that her pride and stubbornness may have led to a life that in her eyes lacks the impact she once believed it would have. Doris came to visit me, her eyes full of concern, but all I could see was the pity behind them, as though she already saw me as a burden, a relic of a past best forgotten. Hagar's relationship with her granddaughter in law, Doris, is strained. Sorry, she is a daughter in law, Doris, strained. As this excerpt illustrates, the pity Hagar perceives in Doris' eyes reflects Hagar's own feelings of vulnerability and her fear of being seen as a burden. The reference to herself as a relic of a past best forgotten highlights Hagar's growing sense of obsolescence and her fear of being irrelevant in the present. This passage touches on the themes of aging, dependency, and the complex dynamics of family relationships, particularly the tension between independence and the inevitable need for care as one grows older. As I walked through the town, I felt like a stranger in a foreign land where nothing was familiar and yet everything was painfully recognizable. This line talks about Hagar's feelings of alienation in Manawaka, the town that is both familiar and foreign to her now. The paradox of recognizing yet feeling disconnected from her surroundings reflect Hagar's internal conflict between her identity and the changes in the world around her. This passage underscores the theme of alienation and the disorientation that comes with change, particularly for someone like Hagar who is deeply indeed rooted into the past. It also highlights the broader theme of belonging and the difficulty of finding one place in a world that has moved on. Here in, yes, Reshma, yes, please.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, please. Yes.
Ma'am, why is Monica it is
Uh, Reshma, your
wonderful?
voice was actually crack.
Okay, one
Yeah, Reshma, your voice is
one second.
cracking. Would you mind writing? Would you
Yeah,
mind writing? Typing
yes.
in the message? Yes. Okay, okay. I'll read it. Yes.
Why is Monica a paradox?
Uh, Please try to put that into the message section so that I read it
Okay, okay.
because I'm not getting your voice exactly the way you want to express. So, meanwhile, when Reshma writes, we continue. So, this was chapter 7, where Hagar plays complex emotions as she confronts her past and her present reality comes into the chapter. We move to chapter 8, where we are still in Hagar Shipley's final days, offering a poignant examination of her reflections and relationships as she nears the end of her life. The chapter reveals Hagar's continued struggle, her interactions, her sense of isolation. Now she is frailing, the nearing the end of her life. Hagar's reflections on her past are still continuing. Her physical and emotional state illustrates her struggle to connect with her life outcomes. Hagar's son, John, remains a significant figure. Hagar's granddaughter, who represents a connection to the younger generation and contrasts with Hagar's frailty. We quickly move to the themes that this chapter is trying to deliver its mortality and legacy and isolation and connection. Moving to the chapters, the wind howled through the cracks in the old house. Yes. So your question is, why is Vanavoka a paradox for? Okay, so you're talking. Oh, so it's okay. It's not Vanavoka. It's not V. It's actually M.
Okay, ma'am.
Manavaka.
Okay.
Okay,
Manavaka.
Manavaka is, yes. That's a paradox because she had unfulfilled desires in that place. That is a place where she grew up. Now she's again back there, and now she sees that the things have changed completely. The way she has left is only that she has left with her past regrets, and everything else has completely changed. So there is a quick shift in the process of environment. However, in case of the conflicts, if we talk about Hagar, that has not changed. She's still delving in back to back with the present and the past and the present and the past with so much of expression. So that becomes an important um, realization that things keep on changing, and so should we. So she so when things change, that means they are letting go of the past shades. However, in case of Hagar, it is not like that. She has not changed yet. She is still reciprocating to her past, and she is still there somewhere. So that's the reason why she's unable to, and that's the reason why the memories are also so fresh. She's unable to come out of it.
Yeah, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you a lot.
Okay, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So we move to the next chapter here, where uh, this is chapter 8. Yes, we'll quickly have to finish. We just have 10 more minutes. So the wind howled through the cracks in the old house, a relentless force that seemed determined to remind me of the fragility of everything I had tried to hold together. This line uses the howling wind as a metaphor for the uncontrollable forces in Hagar's life. The cracks in the old house symbolize the weaknesses and vulnerabilities in her life, both physical and emotional. The wind's relentless nature mirrors the persistent, challenging challenges that Hagar faces, reminding her of the fragility of the structures, both literal and metaphorical. She has tried to maintain. This passage underscores the theme of decay and inevitable passage of time, highlighting how Hagar's efforts to keep her life intact are increasingly futile. John was always the one who pushed boundaries, who challenged me in ways I never anticipated, and yet I never stopped loving him, even when I did not understand him. Hagar reflects on her relationship again with her son, John, acknowledging both the difficulties and the deep love she has for him. This line emphasizes the complex nature of familial relationships, particularly between parents and children. Her reflection also touches the theme of conflict, as John's challenges force Hagar to confront aspects of herself and her life that she would rather avoid. The memories came unbidden, flooding my mind with scenes from a life long past, as though the past has decided to reclaim me, pulling me back into its grasp. Talking about Hagar's experience of being overwhelmed by memories that illustrate the powerful hold that the past has on her. The imagery of the past reclaiming her suggests that Hagar is unable to escape the influence of our memories, which continue to keep coming into her mind every now and then, as if she is stuck, as if she is chained, as if she's not been able to come out of it since her entire life, like an inescapable nature, like a struggle that she's constantly living with, and like a past that is so dominant. There is a broader theme of identity crisis, lack of sense of self, deeply entwined with her recollections and the choices that she had made throughout her life. When I looked into the mirror, I did not recognize the woman staring back at me. She was a stranger, an old woman with eyes that seemed to hold all the sorrow in the world. A, a sorrowful message by the author here. Imagine when we look into the mirror as when we are almost nearing a life, and we would we be able to recognize the woman staring back at us? The line captures Hagar's confrontation with her own aging and the disconnect between her self perception and the reality of her physical appearance. The stranger in the mirror symbolizes the alienation Hagar feels for herself, the way she used to be and the way she is now. Chapter 9, quickly, two more passages and maybe we can just wind up. I never wanted to be a burden, yet here I am entirely dependent on others. No longer the strong woman I prided myself on being. It's a bitter pill to swallow to see the mighty brought low. She's thinking about the loss of independence, the way she was once upon a time, the way she carried herself, a strong woman, in contrast sharply with the current state, where she's dependent on people around her. The bitter pill metaphors underscores the harshness of this realization for someone who has always prided herself on strength and self-sufficiency. I found myself in that nursing home surrounded by people I did not know, and I felt a panic rise in me, a deep choking fear that I was being swallowed by the very things I had always tried to avoid: weakness, helplessness, loss of control. This passage vividly describes Hagar's profound sense of panic and fear upon finding herself in the nursing home. The nursing home symbolizes everything Hagar has tried to resist throughout her life: weakness, helplessness, and the loss of control. The imagery of being swallowed by these fears intensifies the sense of suffocation and the entrapment she feels. Her vulnerability is finally breaking down. Her life resistance is finally breaking down. As I sat in that sterile room, I realized that my life had been a series of battles, most of them fought against those who loved me the most. And now, with no more battles left to fight, I felt an emptiness, a void that I did not know how to fill. A realization here, that is what we see in this chapter, a moment of deep introspection, Hagar, where she recognizes the futility of many of her past conflicts, the destructive impact on her relationships because of the pride she has, the false pride she had. The series of battles refers to the lifelong struggles, the void she feels now that these battles have are over, the emptiness and the isolation that results from a life spent in conflict. I looked out of the window and the world seemed so distant, as though I were already halfway between the life and the next, not quite belonging to either. Strong sentence is used by the character Hagar Shipley in other way, making Margaret Lawrence words of wisdom to all of us, all the readers, that there is a sense of detachment and liminality as she approaches the end of her life. The view out of the window symbolizes the world that is now so distant from her, reflecting her increased isolation from the living world. Chapter 10, the final chapter, where we see uh, there is a deep and moving portrayal of Hagar as she faces the end of her life. There is an emotional depth, providing a resolution to her character. It is strange how the mind works in these last days. Memories flood in, and the boundaries between past and present blur until they are one and the same. The line illustrates Hagar's experience as she nears death, where the distinction between past and present dissolve. The memories become an overwhelming presence. The blurring of these boundaries reflect the novel's ongoing exploration of memory, suggesting that at the end of life, the past can feel as immediate and tangible as the present. I have never prayed in my life, never bent my knee to any god, but now in this moment, I find myself whispering to a presence I cannot name, asking for what? Forgiveness? Understanding? Is it too late for that? I think. Hagar's unexpected impulse to pray in her final moments reveals a deep inner conflict and a sense of desperation. Her lifelong rejection of religion and spirituality contrasts with this sudden instinctual plea for some form of solace or reconciliation. This line explores the theme of existential crisis, highlighting Hagar's struggle with the concept of faith and the possibility of an afterlife. The stone angel stood there, as it always had, unchanged and unchanging, a silent witness to the lives it had watched over for so long. Stone Angel, recurring symbol throughout the novel, is revisited as a representation of permanence and unyielding strength. In contrast to the fragile, fleeting nature of human life, the stone angel remains unchanged, serving as a witness to the generations that have come and gone. As my breath slowed down, the world faded, and I thought of the prairie, the wide open spaces where I once walked, where the wind carried my voice away, and I was free. Final thoughts as she lives past her life, as her life comes to an end. These are all reflection on the freedom and vastness of the prairie, which has been a recurring image in the novel. The imagery of the wind carrying her voice away symbolizes the release of her spirit at the end of her earthly struggles. It also evokes a sense of peace and resolution, as Hagar's final moments are spent in a place of personal significance and contentment. Margaret Lawrence had been a wonderful writer. Her chapter, her book, The Stone Angel, they provide a poignant and a conclusive exploration of Hagar Simply's life and death by depicting Hagar's final moments, her reflections on her past and her interactions with her family. Lawrence aims to delve into the themes of mortality and how important it is to be connected with your family with a proper communication. Through detailed characterization, Margaret Lawrence ends this book implications of every person's life journey. We stop here. We are done with The Stone Angel, beautiful novel. And yeah, so we are done with the chapter. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.